Thank you, Matlacho. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Thank you so much. So what I wanted to do in this, it's kind of a demonstration really, that more than a than a formal presentation about stuff that we've experimented with, but to provide some kind of a possible approach to using ChatGPT, specifically in this case, when we develop learning programs and learning experiences. So perhaps I thought what I wanted to do is to provide some context, is just to talk a little bit about the notion of applied competence and what it means in terms of the higher education qualification sub-framework. So you'll know that in a higher education qualification sub-framework, we've got different levels of qualification, and higher education typically starts at 7 and it goes all the way up to a PhD, which is on the level 10. And the way in which we develop learning programs to align with that framework is with reference to level descriptors. So for every level, there's 10 categories of applied competences that we can possibly include in a qualification at that level. And so these applied competencies can be kind of analyzed into three different elements. So typically we've got a knowledge foundational competence element. Then we've got a practical element, application element, and then we've got a reflexive competence element to them as well. So these applied competences is the philosophical underpinning of the national qualifications framework. So it's really important that we understand that what the qualification framework is trying to work towards is applied competence. And so the whole curriculation process starts with curriculating towards applied competence in over 10 different categories for students doing specific qualifications. So earlier in the year, we developed a workflow for major academic developments. And so my demonstration here isn't really on an academic program. It's more about a short learning program, but the basic process that one follows is pretty much similar. And I wanted to show the flow of that curriculum development process, just to be able to show you where exactly the prompts that I used were helpful. So typically with a qualification or with a learning program, we start with conceptualization. And so the first prompt that I used was really about conceptualization. And I have to say that I used ChatGPT as a tool. And so we would not rely on ChatGPT to do this whole curriculation process. But what we can do is to use it as some kind of a starting point for the conversation that needs to be conducted between a whole lot of different stakeholders. So we've got to talk to people from, for an academic program, people from industry, students, other universities, a whole lot of stakeholders that needs to be involved in this conceptualization conversation. But what ChatGPT can do is it can give you a kick-off framework into which participants in that conceptualization conversation can then start poking holes in and say this needs to go out and this needs to come in. But then typically we have some kind of internal accreditation process, and for academic programs we've got an external process as well. And then eventually we get into working out the detailed learning program that gets implemented. So we do module designs, and within modules we develop units, and we do assessments, and we do learning activities. And finally, once we've run it once, we go back and we review and we see whether the program worked or not, and whether that should be changed, what should be changed. And typically for academic programs, we should really have, like, every 5 years or so, we should have a formal review of that curriculum to see whether it's still doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so in that module design section of the workflow, that's where the other 3 prompts were that I used. So let's have a look at the first prompt that I used. So basically, I tell ChatGPT who I am and what I do for a living, and then I tell it what I'm trying to achieve. So I said, I want to design an asynchronous, fully online, applied competency-based, research-informed short learning program on artificial intelligence for learning and teaching. And who my target audience is going to be. And so the question I asked it is to develop some key topics that needs to be included in a program of that nature. And so what it came up with is basically it had a number of topics, and it was kind enough to also supply me with some subtopics for every one of the topics. So you'll see it started with introduction to AI and education, foundations of machine learning, data collection and analysis, and then under every topic, it would give me, some subtopics that falls under those topics. So that was the first prompt that I used, just to get some kind of a structure for the course that I'd be developing. So for prompt 2, this was actually something that I tried before and I didn't manage to get right. So you might know that for short courses at the university, we don't assign NQF level to short courses, but we do pitch it at a specific level. So this specific qualification I pitched at NQF level 7, which is a B degree level. And what I wanted to do is to make sure that if I'm pitching it at NQF level 7, that the outcomes are aligned to that level. And so the way in which you do that is you write outcomes for the qualifications that are aligned to the level descriptors for that qualification. And so we've become very comfortable with Bloom's taxonomy because we've used it for such a long time, and there's vocabulary that's been developed in time around Bloom's taxonomy. So we know that knowledge level, if you want to write a knowledge level outcome, you want to talk about, list something, understanding, you ask, explain something. So there's a vocabulary that's been developed around Bloom's taxonomy, and it hasn't yet been developed for level descriptors. So it's actually still quite tricky to write an outcome that's relevant to your subject matter, but that's pitched at a specific NQF level. And the NQF, the level descriptors don't really give you good guidance on that. It just says, demonstrate achievement of outcome. It doesn't have those specific directive verbs that we've already developed for Bloom's taxonomy. So my question here was, for the subtopic, and I picked a specific subtopic because it would have taken me forever to do the whole thing. So I just wanted to illustrate the principle. So I picked a specific subtopic, overview of AI-related software platforms and open source tools, which is one of the subtopics under resources and tools, AI resources and tools. And I asked it to write one or more smart learning outcomes and the corresponding assessment criteria. And that the level of these outcomes should be phrased in terms of the level descriptors for this level, of course. And then I listed the 10 level descriptors for NQF level 7. Yeah, so my starting point then is to say, okay, at the end of this learning experience, what is it that the students should be able to do? And when I say able to do, it means, when you get back in your classroom and you want to use AI tools for learning and teaching, what specifically are the competences that you're going to use for teaching in your classroom? And the second question, the assessment criteria question, is really always, how will I know that I've achieved the outcome? So you've got outcome and a way in which you can prove that you've achieved the outcome. And what I wanted ChatGPT to do is to write those outcomes and those level descriptors in the phraseology really of the level descriptors document. And it actually managed to do that quite well. And then I said, follow an output structure of, tell me what the topic is and what the subtopic is, and then write the outcomes and then write the assessment criteria. And from that, what it gave me was the topic, and it gave me subtopics, and then it says, okay, so outcomes. Upon completion of the subtopic, you should be able to, the first outcome it gave me was the level descriptor that it references is scope of knowledge, and then it gives me an outcome that is aligned to the scope of knowledge category of the level descriptors. And straight after that, it goes and it gives me the assessment criteria. So it tells me what it is that you should, what you do to demonstrate that you've achieved the outcome. So demonstrate integrated knowledge of a variety of AI-related software. And the way in which we will know that you've achieved the outcome is if you can accurately identify, list, and describe, and you can describe the primary functionality. So here it gave me 2 outcomes, and it gave me actually 3 outcomes, and it gave me the corresponding assessment criteria for those 3 level descriptors. Again, I would advise that you look really carefully at those outcomes and the assessment criteria from a subject matter expert point of view, because we've heard it so often during the past couple of years that ChatGPT will still hallucinate, and if it doesn't have anything in its frame of reference, it will answer you, but it will answer you with fictional information. All right, so for the next prompt, I wanted to get down to learning activity level, and also to look at, what are the learning activities and what are the possible assessments that you can develop aligned to your assessment criteria that allows the student to show that he's approved, or the participant to show that he or she has achieved the outcomes for that specific, in this case, for the specific subtopic. So what I did is to explain to it what I've done so far. And so the reason why I have to be kind of quite specific when I do the prompt is, you'll know that when you ask ChatGPT a question, it's got a limitation of 4,096 tokens that it places on a response that it gives you. So if you give it one huge mega prompt and you think it's going to develop the whole module for you in one go, it's not going to do that, because there's a limitation on the number of characters that it gives in its output. So what you need to do is you've got to kind of do a piecemeal prompting process. So you start with topics, and then you start with outcomes and level descriptors. Or, well, that's what I did. And then in one of the outcomes, then you go into further detail, and then you go into further detail. And you have to do that because of that limitation in the output that ChatGPT will give you. And so again, under the subtopic, so I told it I told ChatGPT that's my outcome. Those are the assessment criteria for that specific subtopic. And I asked it then a question to develop a self-directed online asynchronous learning activity, not involving group work, that will allow learners to successfully complete an assessment of applied competence, which was structured to assess adherence to the assessment criteria listed. So just a comment on that prompt. When I asked it the prompt, when I gave it the prompt the first time, I didn't mention that they shouldn't include group work. And so what it did is the third activity it gave me was actually a group activity. So the reason why I then went back to include that specific part of the prompt to not include group work is my intention with the course, with this course, was that it would be a self-directed course, if you'll remember that, and that it would be asynchronous. Now, as soon as you start bringing group work into that, it makes the self-direction and the group work and the asynchronicity of it makes it difficult. So I wanted to make sure that our learning experience would be appropriate to a participant who's doing this all on his or her own, in his or her own time. And so I did a slight modification on the prompt to make sure that we exclude group work from that. Not to say that you shouldn't ever use group work, it's just in this specific application, I felt that if you wanted the course to be self-directed and asynchronous, the group work might make your might make individuals' achievements of the learning outcome difficult when they have to rely on other people's participation in the group work. And so what it came up with then is a learning activity that says, so let's just look at the specific outcome. It says demonstrate integrated knowledge of a variety of AI-related software platforms and open source tools commonly used in educational settings, including an understanding of the key features and functionality. With assessment criteria, which is intended to allow the student the opportunity to prove that he or she has achieved the outcome. And so when we talk about it, I've heard today a couple of times we talk about this notion of constructive alignment. And so through this process, I want to demonstrate how, if you're intentional about it, you can actually get this constructive alignment from your initial outcome to the assessment criteria, which informs your assessment, to the learning activity, and ultimately then to your submission of the assessment. So if you think about this, outcome is about using an AI tool in your environment for learning and teaching. And then you look at the learning activity. The activity is to search for 3 AI tools on the internet and to find some information around, what is the tool, what can it be used for, what are the features of the tool, how does it scale, what's the cost effectiveness, but then also to look at how that tool can be used for learning and teaching in your classroom and to find some relevant use cases. So on the basis of that activity, you go and you write a report on the 3 AI tools that you identified. And in the specific case, the assessment is simply the report that you've written. And that to me was an interesting way that the tool went about doing the assessment. Because if you look at it carefully, you'll see that the learning activity is actually the assessment. So you go and you have a learning activity. When you're done with the learning activity, that's your submission. And so there's not really a separate assessment task that you're going to do. You do the learning activity, you record, what you've done, and you submit that. So that was an interesting approach to assessment, I think, that ChatGPT did. That I think it's something that that I'll keep in mind in future when I do assessments, is to do that kind of assessment, which is really just a documentation of what your learning was. I've mentioned in different fora before that we have this thing where assessment is such a huge part of what we do at university. And what assessment really should be is simply an opportunity for students to demonstrate what they have learned. And so I also want to say the fixation that we have with assessment is what gets us into trouble in the first place. If we can turn away from the assessment for a while and just make sure that the learning activity is structured in a way that the student learns what they need to learn, then the assessment problem and the assessment integrity problem to a large extent may go away, because they're simply just documenting what they have learned. So I like the idea of documenting your learning and submitting that as your proof of achieving the learning outcome. Okay, and then the final thing that I wanted to do is to find a fairly objective way in which the submission could be assessed. And so the last thing I did is I gave ChatGPT the learning activity again, and I said, now develop a peer assessment rubric for the assessment of the of this learning activity. And I gave it 4 different discriminating levels. I said, novice, developing, competent, expert, and that it had to develop a peer assessment rubric for me against which this the submission could be assessed. As a matter of interest, I asked ChatGPT to give me those 4 levels as well. So I just said, give me the 4 levels that you can use to assess a competency-based learning activity, and it came up with those 4 categories. And so finally, what it is it came up. Oh, where did my there you go. Just change that a little bit. And so it came up with a rubric with criteria, identification of key tools, functionality, understanding, comparison, and evaluation. And it draws this from the assessment criteria. It draws your criteria, application scenarios, clear and organized presentation, proper citations, and it's got the 4 discriminating levels. And so this is probably going to be fairly naive, but I think it's a good starting point for a rubric that you can use to assess that learning activity. Thanks, Matlacha. I'm just about done. Yeah, and so the idea with a workflow like this is not for you to run through the workflow, and when you're done, that's your course. The idea is to sit around with a program team, and then you use the tool to kind of generate a starting point for you, and then the team works together to make that better. And just something else around that is often when the team at CLTD, when they're busy with a program development, my comment is always, don't try to get this perfect before you implement the first time, because you're never going to get there. So what we do is, we know we have to run a program at some point in time. We do it as best we can. And then when the time comes for us to run the program, we run it, we get feedback, and we improve it. And so you have a really good first attempt, but then you make it better and better through a process of iterative process of course review. And so that is what, if you ask me how will I use ChatGPT to have a draft structure for a short learning program, I think this is something that might be a good starting point. Thank you, Matlacho. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerrit. And now we're going to open the floor to questions and comments. So colleagues, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay, there is a comment in the chat options by Rita, and she says that perhaps because one requires and interactive language that is inclusive of knowledge, skills, values, and attitude. And in this way, we can also start changing the culture of what more innovative and interactive assessment would look like. And Najma also says, I would imagine a lot happens before we get to this constructive alignment, right? And that's a question mark. We talk about developing and designing learning experience, and thus moving to activities and topics requires pariah steps.
Yeah, thanks. Let me comment on that, Najma. Yes, that's right. And I think Rita in an earlier conversation also made that comment where that conceptualization conversation needs to be a broad conversation. It needs to take context into account. It needs to take participants into account. It needs to take utility into account. It needs to take a whole variety of things into account. And so what ChatGPT will probably have difficulty with is to get that specific nuance into the topics that you need, and into the learning activities that you need, and into the assessments that you need even. But so what is sometimes difficult when you start from scratch with a new learning program is just to get a starting point. And so what we would typically do is we would go and sit in a room, and we'd start with a blank piece of paper, and we would do that first conceptualization. And so what I'm suggesting is that we use this as a starting point for that conceptualization. And then we bring a number of relevant voices into the conversation to make sure that that the topics that we end up in the program are actually relevant to context and to utility and whatever the other considerations may be. Rita?
I actually would like to believe that we should start the other way around, because with the shared values around the macro social and historical issues as to what's going to inform this course, together with who's the student, who's the institution, where this would take place, I think in getting a sense of what we then input into the AI will allow us perhaps to get more of that understanding through, in terms of giving us a way forward, rather than taking the way forward and then talking about what our context is.
I think that's actually what Philippa Hartman, when she does her macro prompts, she does that. She gets very specific about context as a first step, and then she builds that context into the prompts. And so I agree with you. I think that that would be a starting point to get together to develop the kind of context that you want to develop for, then to write the prompts, and then to look at what comes out of that, out of ChatGPT, and then to have another conversation around whether this is really captures what you want to achieve. So absolutely, this process started a little bit in the middle. I agree with you that you should probably have that first context that you give into the into ChatGPT for the first prompt. That should be informed by a preliminary discussion around, well, not a short discussion, but the first discussion that informs the context that you put into the first prompt. Yeah, thanks, Rita. Yeah, there's a balance that one often needs to find. I find that sometimes we have the human conversation, but it doesn't end. It doesn't come to a point where we actually, get to start the development process. Especially if you've got a diverse group. So sometimes it works. Sometimes it works better to put something on the table first and then to poke holes in that. But yeah, I do agree that broader consultation is probably a good idea before you enter that first prompt. There's a hand. Let me just see. Is it still Rita?
I just had a cynical thought. I thought, what would referencing look like for us, and what would plagiarism then look like for us, and how do we account for it? It's a cynical thought, so it's okay.
Yes. So the thing that I've seen, Rita, and other people might have asked the question. So what I've seen is even some journals, what they do is they don't require you to reference ChatGPT, but they do require you to say where in the deliverable, the construction, where the input is that you took from ChatGPT. So you acknowledge that you did use it, and you indicate in your construct where exactly it is that the AI contributed to, well, AI, the LLM contributed to your construct. Sometimes, sometimes, if you ask ChatGPT for a reference, it comes up with references sometimes, but it's made up references. So there are some tools that you can use. I can perhaps just flick to one quickly. The one tool is Consensus, the other tool is Perplexity, and apparently they are a whole lot better with finding actual references. Consensus actually will do a synthesis for you of the articles that you've looked for, and it's a naive synthesis, but it will identify articles for you. I still prefer Google Scholar, I have to say. As a starting point. To see if I can. Referencing. Okay, Fatima's just posted some information around referencing for content generated by ChatGPT. I want to be careful to not call this AI. I heard Mariette speak about GAI yesterday, generative AI. Okay, thanks. I don't know if there are any other questions, comments.
Thank you, Gerrit. It is 4 o'clock, so we did start 2 minutes late. So if there are pressing comments or questions, please feel free. Other than that, thank you so much, Gerrit. Then if we don't have any questions or comments, then we can move on to the next session, which is the closure and reflection. Again, it's by Gerrit Wissing. The floor is yours once more.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so this was an interesting CLTD conference for me too. As typically we sit in the background, and you'll see that not many CLTD staff members participate in the conference, in the front end of the conference. We typically run around and do session chairs. So this was a bit of a new experience for me. Thank you for giving me that time. I want to take some time to reflect on the conference and to get some inputs and views from participants around what their experience of the conference was. So I've got a number of different ways in which you can participate. Melissa, I don't know if you've got the link to the evaluation form. If you can put that into the chat for us.
Sure, Dr. Wissing, I've just posted it.
Okay, and then I've got a little whiteboard that I'm going to share the link to, and perhaps you can post some of your ideas to the whiteboard, and the whiteboard is what I'm displaying on the screen right now. And I've never done this before, so hopefully it will allow you to, if you click on the link, take you to the whiteboard, and you can enter some of your thoughts on it. And the third channel that we can use, obviously, is just the chat. So if you want to take some time to speak about things that you learned over the past 3 days, and you're welcome to take the mic and switch on your camera and share that, or to put something in the chat, or to put something on the exit ticket whiteboard that I'm displaying on the screen right now. So I don't know if there are any initial comments around things that you've learned. I have to say that when I'm going to talk to give you some time to write stuff down and to think about what you want to say. So when we started in November last year, I think when we first started seeing ChatGPT happening, we were all kind of very involved in reading, and I think there's been such a proliferation of tools that maybe many of us has stopped keeping up to date. So this to me was a good idea, a good opportunity just to hear from some of the participants and some of the invited speakers what has happened, you know, and what is new and what they see that I've missed. And so, you know, that was good. Let me see if I can change the permissions. If that doesn't work, I've never done this before, so I'm pretty sure. Just check if you can work on it now. Ah, that's what it is. Okay, so I've put in a new link that should work. So if that doesn't work, please just type your comments in the chat, or take the mic. Like that. Things that you found interesting. There you go. It looks like things are happening now. I think if you right click on the screen someplace, it gives you the opportunity to put in text. Use the text to put in stuff. Right click and then text. Or doesn't that work? Oh, okay. Yeah, the new comment is something else, so you have to put in text. Also, things I found interesting. I did enjoy Prof. Kratschke's talk. I always listen very carefully when Prof. Osman speaks, because her views kind of informs the work of the center. So I always listen very carefully when she speaks, and the same with Prof. Grayson. The work of the center is kind of informed by the direction that they indicate. So I always enjoy their contributions, and specifically this year, I loved listening to Ma. It was it was such a relaxed conversation that she had, and I enjoyed Laura's contribution this morning as well. I think I'm perhaps guilty of being overly pragmatic, and so my question is always not just about what the concerns are and what the biases are, but what do we do in our practice? How do we manage our practice to address those biases? And so often I get the sense that we speak more about what the challenges are rather than what the solutions to the challenges are. But I did see some interesting work that people were doing around using ChatGPT as simulated patients, for example. I saw there's a talk this afternoon, and the way in which you use it to generate questions, and yeah, that was interesting for me. I think the things I still have questions about. This morning I asked a question of Laura, actually, and exactly about what I said previously is we are aware of all the challenges around large language models and the biases inherent in that. I do worry sometimes that we direct our concerns in the wrong direction. I think AI and large language models takes its biases and its challenges from its creators, but we tend to direct our attention towards the product rather than to the producer. I think we should be more critical about who it is that are producing these problematic technologies, and how do we go about addressing the real problem of bias in society and harmful practices in society and racism in society, because that's the origin of what we find manifest in the technology in the end. And the second question I always have is, okay, so the technology is here now. So what do we do? Do we say, okay, we're not going to use the technology? We're going to say we're going to use it, but we're going to use it in a way that addresses the concerns that we have with it. And my concern is, if we're not the ones using it, if we're not the ones trying to find good ways to address the challenges that we have, the people who are working with the technology are then those people who are the originators of the harm. So there's this maxim about evil that prospers when good men say nothing. And so my view kind of wants to be that I want to get involved to see how we can use the technology for good, rather than saying, let's not touch this. Rita says very passionate conversations about affordances and unconsciously reproducing the access to social ills of the past. We need to consider follow-up conversation. Yes, we jump from topic to topic, but it would be important to scaffold over the next month and come back in the following on a larger conversation. Conversations, and I guess you can read it, conversations and changes in practice and policy for enabling of equitable access for students, HE practitioners and academics. So Roxana said we kind of need to develop a framework for around AI for the university, and Natasha suggested that we do that for the sector, even that we have a sector-wide conversation as well. And I think in the months to follow, we should be doing that. Diane, I think we should definitely do that. I think one of the things that we also need to do is, to take to heart what Roxana has said, and to look at the 4 categories that she mentioned, and to start having conversations around those 4 categories and others that might be appropriate. The one thing that did surprise me is the student panel, and kind of the balance between who has used it before and who hasn't used it before, and who's used it kind of on their own, but hasn't used it in class, and those who have used it in class. So from that panel, I seem to gather that some lecturers aren't using the large language models in their teaching, if the students say that they haven't used it. And, in some of those cases, I think students have used it, that they haven't used that in class. And so that's perhaps, something that we should think about. If our students are using the models and we're not using it, maybe we should engage a little bit more with the models to see what its impact on our learning and teaching is. I attended a panel discussion earlier in the year at Northwest University, and from that panel, it seemed like all of the students were using it. So it was interesting to me to see that there were still some students who hadn't used it. Yeah, no, absolutely, Najma. I worked with some students from ICT earlier in the year, and all of them had used it. And they developed a tool for me that was actually embedded in ChatGPT. So certainly in some environments, I think it's getting used more than others. Somebody in the evaluation form said that that's something that we've got to do, Natasha, is that we do need to work with our students on this. I think we need to use. I think we need to work with our academics and with our students on this. As always with technology, I think there are early adopters and there are people who follow behind. And so we've seen some good work in the conference with people who are kind of leading the pack. But I do get the sense that there are some who are still waiting to see what's going to happen. And I think, so students and academics, we should be engaging in conversations around this. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I see a lot of comments on the exit ticket. We are still grappling, but collective thinking is great. Yeah, absolutely. I think what Laura said this morning was encouraging when I asked her, so what do we do? And she said, we're doing what we should be doing. We should be having these conversations. And so that was in a way that was nice to hear that from that sense that the conference is appreciated. Existing concepts of plagiarism are no longer very relevant. It seems our students are using generative AI less than we thought and are aware of the limitations. Different AI tools and the different uses. Yeah, that was really interesting to me. I was wondering how many academics were actually using and how many students were actually using it. And so we get into contact with some academics at the center, and some of them are doing really interesting things, but I was wondering how many. And I think we haven't had as many papers at the conference before. So there seems to be a keen interest in using the technology in our learning and teaching. That's an important question. How can we work with the tool developers and have input into what we want from these tools? Again, Laura this morning mentioned that TikTok has changed their community rules based on public pressure. And so that's something that we've got to find a way to do, is to, when we see the concerns, when we identify issues that we start kind of making our voices heard around that, to see if we can, how we can pressure technology developers to develop technology for good. We're at 4:15, and so I don't want to carry on any longer. I do want to give everybody the final opportunity to grab the mic and say a few words, after which I think we can close the conference. Melissa has posted the link to the evaluation form in the chat as well. Maybe, Melissa, you can do that again. I would request, please, that you do an evaluation for us. Previous 2 days, we've got about 18 responses. So I appreciate if you can do a formal evaluation for us as well. Anybody specifically who wants to give a few parting thoughts? On camera, of course. And final thing perhaps to ask is, if you feel comfortable doing that, is to switch on your cameras for a second and kind of just wave at your screen so we can see what you look like in real life. If you feel comfortable doing that. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for maybe what I should not forget to do is just to thank the organizing committee and the contributors to the conference, Fatima and Najma and the rest of the CLTD team. Thank you so much for organizing. Hi, Tom. I haven't seen you in a while. For the hard work that you've put in organizing the conference for us, and for chairing sessions, and to our presenters for the hard work that you put into preparing and presenting your papers. We appreciate that. We learned a lot from you. We're going to carry on engaging with you, and we do really appreciate that you picked our conference to come and share your thoughts with. The conference doesn't work if we don't hear from you. Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, from myself and from CLTD, To all our participants and all our delegates, thank you for the past 3 days and for your time and attention. We appreciate that, and looking forward to engaging with you in the days and months to follow, and to carry the conversation further. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye. Thank you.
And
Bye,
Candice,
everyone. Thank you
and-
so much.
and Candice and Melissa, thank you so much. Melissa, you and your team for organizing, and Candice, who does all of the heavy lifting in the office. Thank you so much.